Hello and welcome to A Gentle Healing Journey. My name is Rain Francis, and on this channel I talk about how to deal with life's struggles and challenges. This is my first video in a series that I'm doing about why we stay in emotionally abusive relationships. I can speak from my own experience as well as from an educational point of view. But before I get into all of the reasons why we stay, I think it's important to first talk about coercive control. For the purpose of understanding, why don't I define what coercive control is? So, coercive control is defined as a pattern of behavior used to control and dominate. When we hear about coercive control, it's usually talked about with regards to intimate relationships. But the behavior of coercive control can definitely be happening within families and even in friendships. And quite often, when the victim of the abuse is able to leave their abuser, the coercive control continues after separation. It can be very dangerous. It's a pattern of behavior that is intentional, it's abusive, and it's meant to instill fear in another person. Now, throughout my 12-year marriage, I often refused to even consider that my late husband was intentionally trying to control me through abusive behavior. I couldn't get it through my mind that he would do these things on purpose. But the more I learned about coercive control and the more I learned about emotional abuse, the more I realized that it was intentional, but maybe not in a conscious way, if that makes any sense to you. It didn't just happen by chance, though. This behavior was inside of him. And I'm quite sure that he exhibited this behavior well before he met me. You know, as I think back and reflect on stories that he told me of when he was younger and how he reacted to certain situations, I can see how the pattern of coercive control behavior was definitely behavior that he used in other relationships as well. The pattern of behavior is all about control. And when we think of controlling partners, we often think of the cliche aggressive, physical, abusive partner who intimidates and instills fear in their victim. But most of the time, it's really not that extreme. Most of the time, it's done subtly. And as I mentioned, systematically. So you kind of start to get used to it. I think when a person feels completely out of control of a situation that they so desperately want control of, they start to use coercive control as a desperate measure. This is why I still have issues thinking that it's a conscious and intentional plan to control another person. I really believe that this is all the person knows how to do in that situation. But not every situation is the same. Every case is different. But more on that after. So the next question we can ask ourselves is, how does coercive control work so effectively on so many people? It works because, as I mentioned, it's a pattern of behavior. It's not one single incident of abuse. It's ongoing, and it systematically strips away your self-confidence, your self-esteem, and your energy is drained. The behavior is used to manipulate and intimidate and sometimes isolate the victim. And it's often done without physical abuse. It's done using verbal and emotional abuse, passive-aggressive behavior. And this really does make the victim feel controlled and trapped. I think that the reason why coercive control works so well is because of the effects that it has on the victim. This pattern of behavior creates a sense of fear. It makes you question your safety. And by safety, I can mean physical safety, but in my case, it was more like the inability to enjoy my life in my home without having to alter my behavior and tiptoe around. I didn't feel safe in my home because I didn't feel comfortable. I also felt trapped at times, and I'll discuss that a little bit later when I talk to you about the signs, the 12 signs of coercive control. But I felt trapped out of guilt and out of fear. I also felt a little bit of a violation. And by that I mean, I was afraid that when I wasn't in the house, that he was going through my stuff. He had admitted in the past that he went through my computer. He took my phone a few times and he wouldn't give it back to me. And he went through my files. So his coercive control started to break the trust that I had in him. And I didn't feel safe when I left the house. I felt the constant need to hurry back home just to protect my privacy. And it was a bit of a confusing time for me because though I wanted to get back home to make sure that he wasn't going through my things, I didn't really want to go back home because I just didn't want to be around that atmosphere of tension. And just on a personal note, I just think it's so sad because I had full trust in him for years. I mean, he had all of my passwords. We shared everything. I never had anything to hide. But his behavior caused me to distrust him. It caused me to change my passwords. It caused me to hide things that I didn't think I wanted him to see, or that I knew he would take as something other than it really was. And this was all during one part of the cycle of abuse, which I'm going to discuss in the next video next week. You know, when you're a victim of coercive control over a period of time, you can develop feelings of helplessness. Your self-identity starts to get lost. You become anxious and hyper-vigilant. Your stress just skyrockets because you're pretty much regularly going through fight or flight. And it creates a lot of trauma as well. You feel like you can't be yourself. And as I speak about my late husband, I'm always very careful to mention that I didn't fall in love with a horrible guy. And I've often mentioned that it wasn't 24/7. It didn't happen every day. We went through months and even years at a time having a happy relationship. But it started to gradually get worse over time. He did have two sides to him. He was a very sweet and loving man. A lot of the times, he was so fun to be with, and I really truly loved him. But there was that side of him that just wasn't so nice to me. And he's not here for me to talk to him about this and to try to uncover what was going on with him when he chose to use coercively controlling behaviors. But I think I can make a few educated guesses. I know that he loved me, but it was a bit of an obsessive love. He often told me he wouldn't be able to live if he knew that I was with another man. He often told me that I was his soulmate and that he'd made his choice and that I was his and that he didn't want anyone else to be with me. He said he was so in love with me that it hurt. And he was often suspicious with me, checking my phone, looking over my shoulder when I was on the internet or when I was sending an email, asking me who I was getting dressed up for when I was just going grocery shopping, things like that. So I don't think he was sitting there planning on how to control me. I believe that it was coming from a place of deep insecurity. The idea that he wasn't good enough and his fear that one day I was going to leave him. But in his case, it was also mixed with desperation, the perception that I was untrustworthy, which was a false perception, but also some mental health challenges that he was suffering that were going untreated. I truly believe that his behavior was based on desperation to keep me in his life, and also on extreme self-esteem and self-worth issues. Of course, I can say all of this in hindsight because it's been just over a year since he took his life, and I've done a lot of education since then, and I've done a lot of self-therapy as well. I posted a video last week on the things that I did to help me get through the grief. It's a bit of a self-help video, and I can put a link up in the card above and also in the description below. I guess what I'm saying is that I don't believe that his behavior was malicious. It came out as malicious, but I don't think that was his intent. I think his intent was to desperately keep me in his life because he was so afraid that I was going to leave him all the time. So yes, when the experts say that coercive control is intentional, I can see that, but each person's intent is different. My late husband's intent was to keep me in his life, and the tactics that he used with me, thinking that they would work, those were great examples of coercive control. I don't think he intentionally sat down every night and plotted against me, really. I have to say that again. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I think it's a subconscious, unintentional action that makes it intentional, if that makes sense. There's a sociologist, and his name is Evan Stark, and he developed what he called the 12 signs of coercive control. He was a specialist in intimate partner abuse, and because of him and his work, there is now a greater understanding of how this form of abuse impacts the victim on a psychological basis. So here are the 12 signs of coercive control, according to Evan Stark. Number 1 is questioning your actions. You can never seem to just go and do something that you want to do. You always have to explain yourself. And it seems as though your partner's always questioning your every move. This was a behavior that I experienced, but it happened so slowly and gradually that it felt almost normal for me. He didn't drive, and he had severe social anxiety, so I was the one who used to always go to town for shopping, for groceries, to the vet, to the pharmacy. You get the idea. And whenever I would tell him that I was just going to go out, I'm going shopping, he would question me. Why? Why are you going out? Why do you need to do that? Why is it that important to go out? Like I said, it started slowly, and probably in the last 5 years of our relationship, and it kind of took me aback. Why do I have to explain myself? You know, I just told you I'm jumping in the car and I'm going shopping, or I'm checking the mail. It got worse, and I started to feel frustrated, and I would just ask him to stop interrogating me. That's how it felt. But that always ended up in an argument, so eventually it just felt easier to have excuses ready to go so that I wouldn't have to think about anything and feel flustered. Because if I started to show signs of feeling flustered, not knowing how to answer, why are you going out, when I just said I was going out to shop, he became more suspicious about me. And a lot of the times it ended up in a huge fight, and I really just ended up staying home. So in the end, he did get what he wanted. So number 2 is isolation. A lot of the times, someone who is using coercive control, they'll try to isolate you from the people who matter to you the most. In extreme cases, they might make you choose between a friend or a family member and them. This didn't happen to me until about 2024. I think it was the 3rd time that I had tried to push for a trial separation at that time, and I asked him to move out. And during this time, he told me that 2 of my friends were sending him hate emails. He was trying to turn me against them, and I knew that this wasn't true. I could see right through it, and he later admitted to the lie. But I'm somebody who, I don't have a huge circle of friends. I have a handful of very close connections with beautiful people I call friends, and he knew this. And by singling out 2 of them, he was trying to isolate me from my friendships, from the only other people whom I was close to and who really mattered to me. There were a few other incidences where he tried to isolate me, and I'll be honest with you, it made me very frightened, and I still feel a little bit of anxiety as I talk about this. We were having the usual ridiculous arguments over nothing. And on 2 incidences, he just grabbed my phone away from me. I was holding it and he grabbed it and he refused to give it back. And during that time, he continued to verbally and emotionally abuse me, leaving me with no lifeline for help. We didn't have a landline phone, and the closest neighbor is about 1 kilometer away. My phone was my lifeline back then, and when he refused to give it back to me, I felt like it was a threat to my safety. I felt like I was being forced to take this abuse without any way to help myself get out of it. I haven't really told too many people about this, and it kind of feels good to let it out, even though I feel anxiety, because this is something that can cause deep trauma when you feel trapped in a situation that you can't get out of, can't call for help, and someone's abusing you. This happened quite often when we were in the car as well. The verbal abuse would start. What can I do? I'm on the highway driving. I can't escape my car. And you know, it's interesting. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were discussing childhood trauma. And I had a childhood trauma where I was trapped somewhere and I was being physically abused. And it's interesting how I found myself in a similar situation as an adult in my marriage. Not physically abused though. But anyway, that's for another video. Why don't I continue with the signs of coercive control? Number 3 is denying you independence. Your partner may try to limit your freedom. Maybe they'll insist that you stay home. You don't need to work. There may be only one family car, and they take it to work and to go out, and they leave you stuck at home all the time. Maybe they insist on accompanying you when you want to go out with your friends. There was a time when I used to do a lot of live streams. I believe I was doing 5 live streams a week. Some of them I was doing on my own, and some of them I was collaborating with other YouTube creators. It was so much fun. I really, really had a lot of fun doing those. I was trying to grow my YouTube channel, all my channels, and it did take up a lot of my time. I used to do so much research and preparation, and I absolutely loved it. My channels were growing. It was working. My live stream shows were becoming more popular. More people were watching. More people wanted to be on them. I was a success. But the passive-aggressive remarks started here and there that I was spending, come on, Miley, I was spending too much time on the internet, not enough time nurturing the relationship. And that's why there were so many problems in the relationship, I was told. I never really reacted to those attempts to stop me from doing live streams because, naturally speaking, I'm a very independent person. And there was really only one instance where he made a threat as he tried to deny my independence. And this was during that same time when I mentioned previously that he said 2 of my friends were sending him hate emails. I was supposed to meet a blogger friend and her husband, and I was planning on going to a restaurant just to hang out with them for a few hours because they were in my area. It's so exciting when you get to meet someone, you know, in person who you've known online for years. Anyway, he did not want me to go. He was convinced that I was going to meet another man, and he threatened suicide if I followed through and went. So what ended up happening after a long and drawn out, emotionally draining conversation and argument, I told him, okay, come with me, but I don't want you to meet them. You can stay in the car. I just didn't want him to meet my blogger friends because they didn't know about the relationship, and I knew he was going to try to make things a little difficult and uncomfortable. But other than that, he never tried to seriously deny me any of my independence. Number 4 is gaslighting. Oh, gaslighting. This is where the abuser makes you doubt your own truth, your own experience, and sometimes your own sanity by insisting that they are always right. It's basically manipulating the truth. Even if you can prove to the finest detail that you are right about something that you know, or something that you've said or that you've felt, they'll find a way to manipulate the truth so that you're always wrong. This happened so often in the later years of our relationship that it started to figuratively drive me crazy. I knew that I heard him say certain things. I knew that I said certain things. But I was so often told that I was wrong. It was very frustrating. And for a while, I always stood up for myself and I insisted that I knew my own reality. But eventually it just kind of became easier to go along with what he was saying and secretly know that I knew my truth. I do know, however, that gaslighting can be very distressing, destructive, and concerning. In my case, I had a strong enough mindset that I would not allow it to pull me into drama. I'm always somebody who is very willing to see somebody else's perspective, and I'm happy to accept that everybody sees possibly the same thing in a different way sometimes, and I'm okay with that. But when it happens as a pattern to prove that you're wrong about everything, that's not okay. Number 5 is name calling and criticism. I think that most of us can admit that at times we've flown off the handle and maybe we've said something that we regret, but also most of us are willing to apologize and make amends. Most of us have learned a lesson to never say that thing again, those words that were the cause of the hurt to the person that we love. The person using coercive control does not make amends. They might apologize, but usually it's lip service. If somebody calls you names and it hurts you, and you stand up to them and you say, "Can you please not ever call me that again because it really hurts my feelings," and they continue to call you those names, you can be sure that they're not going to stop name calling. They think it's their right to call you whatever name they want to call you. Constant criticism is another one. When somebody is constantly putting you down, making little jabs at your expense, derogatory comments about, the way you look or the way you act or the way you speak, that can be very degrading, and it can really mess with your self-esteem, because this is somebody who's supposed to love you and help you shine in the world. They're not supposed to throw hate your way and push you down. It's the equivalent of bullying. And, I'm not really ready to give personal examples about this, but name calling and criticism, that was definitely a big experience in my relationship. Okay, so number 6, financial control. Financial control is a tactic to keep a person dependent on their abuser. Controlling finances is a way of restricting your freedom and your ability to leave the relationship. I think that a common example we can all think of financial control would be in a marriage where the role of the man and the woman are pretty traditional. The woman stays at home, she takes care of the kids, and the man goes out to work. He may put her on an allowance, not give her access to bank accounts, maybe prevent her from having a credit card of her own, or he may monitor every penny that she spends. Now, there was never any of that in my marriage because I was the primary breadwinner, and I was also in charge of the budget and of the bill paying. But it can go two ways. There were a handful of times, again, later on in the relationship, the last 5 years, when we were fighting a lot, and after one of these fights, he would always give me the silent treatment, and it could last for days. I started to notice a pattern where he would pick fights with me right at the end of the month, and then during these silent treatments, he would just not send me the money that he was supposed to be sending me at the end of every month to help pay the bills. I remember I would have to knock on the door, go in his room, apologize for the fight, and ask for the money. It was so humiliating, but for the longest time, we were house poor. House poor means that you can pay all your bills, but there's not much left. So I needed his contribution every month. And he started accusing me of only being with him for the money. It was just awful. Number 7, reinforcing traditional gender roles. Convincing you to take care of all domestic duties. Cleaning, doing laundry, doing all the cooking, doing all the shopping, taking care of the kids, taking care of the pets, without sharing the responsibilities. It's interesting, when I think back on the relationship, because for the first 7 years or so, we shared all of the house responsibilities. The only responsibility I can remember that we never shared equally was the pet care, the dog care. I loved walking the dogs, and he didn't like going out. He didn't want to leave the house, so I took care of all the dog walks, but I was okay with that. I was also okay with all of the traditional wifey type of roles. I loved it. I loved cooking. I loved cleaning. I wanted to be a little Martha Stewart. But I would say during the last 5 years that we were together, I started to feel resentment that I was doing it all alone, even though I started to ask for help. And I wanted to mention this as well. There are some people who do follow traditional gender roles in a marriage, and this doesn't mean that you're being coercively controlled necessarily. If it's a choice made by both partners, that's super healthy. But if it's forced on you, that's where there could be some coercive control issues there. So number 8, turning your children against you. Oof. This doesn't apply to me because we didn't have children together. But if you have children, I hate this. Your partner may belittle you in front of them or make degrading comments in front of them, criticizing you in front of them. They may go as far to tell your kids that you're a bad parent. They might make you do all of the unpleasant tasks and secretly tell the child how mean you are. I'm going to give you an example here. It's not a personal example. It's something that I saw on TV, on a documentary, and it's really, really sad. There was a woman who was telling her story about how she survived a physically, emotionally, sexually, and verbally abusive marriage. And she had a young son, and her husband turned her son against her by criticizing her, by making fun of her in front of the child. He would also bring the child into the room when he would physically abuse her. And apparently he did this for years as the child was growing up. And she said there was a time when her son was about 7 years old, he started calling her names and he started to physically hit her. He was doing the same thing that his father was doing, and he thought it was normal. Like I said, it's really sad, but these things do happen. When a coercive partner successfully turns your children against you, this can deepen the feeling of being isolated and fearful. And of course, it brings on a host of trauma and mental health issues I can't even imagine. Number 9 is controlling aspects of your health and of your body. In this case, the abuser might monitor or control what and how much you eat, your sleep, your exercise, or even how much time you spend in the bathroom. They may control where you go for medical help, dentists, the medications you take. I was watching a movie recently called Alice Darling, and it was about a woman who was being emotionally abused by her boyfriend. In one of the scenes, if I remember correctly, they were going to a coffee shop and she wanted to buy a pastry. And he started making some very passive-aggressive remarks about how she might gain weight and that maybe she should make a better choice. Now, the movie went on to show similar scenes where he was trying to control aspects of her health and of her body. And this systematic treatment coerced her into watching all of her calories and over-exercising. She was watching her weight and keeping her body in optimal health, not because she wanted to. She was doing it because of his coercive control. Now, number 10, making jealous accusations. There is an underlying mistrust. You may be accused of cheating. You may be accused of flirting. And I alluded to this in a previous point. Your partner could be jealously complaining about the time that you spend with a friend or family member, either in person or online. It's kind of a way to maybe guilt you into spending less time with other people and spending more time with them. My relationship with my late husband was very complicated. He was almost completely isolated, but it was self-isolation. He never wanted to leave the house. He refused to speak to any of the neighbors or the repair people who came around. I think he had one friend that he communicated with over Facebook now and then, but most of the time, he was just alone. He told me one time, "Rain, you are my entire world. I have no interest in humanity and society. I only want you in my life." And I think he kind of expected me to be the same. And when I didn't turn out to be that way, he started to show signs of extreme jealousy when I spent my time with friends. He got very jealous that I spent time working. There were threats made. There was a lot of criticism. And there were attempts to disrupt me while I was working. In my case, I have a very strong will, and I didn't allow that jealousy to make any huge impact. Jealousy is not a good trait. It can be very dangerous. And the scary part about jealousy is that it can easily escalate to physical violence. That can be scary. Number 11 is regulating your sexual relationship, making demands about your sex life, insisting on intimacy, whether you're in the mood or not, whether you're in pain or not, whether you're exhausted or not. I think this point is kind of self-explanatory, and thankfully this was not something that I experienced in my marriage. The fact is that a healthy marriage and relationship or partnership, there are two consenting adults, right? Each partner has the right to their own opinion, their own schedule, and their own desire and ideas when it comes to sexual intimacy. And that should be respected. It should never be demanded. Number 12 is threatening your children or your pets. This is insidious, sometimes in desperation, I think, when emotional, verbal, or financial threats don't seem to work anymore. Threatening to physically harm innocent beings like your children or your pets, it becomes the next step in coercive control. There could be threats of violence, or of taking your children away from you, kidnapping them, or rehoming your pets, or threatening to call child services and saying that you're neglecting your children. This is an extreme form of intimidation, and I would say that depending on the pattern of coercive control, this is the sign of coercive control that can cause the most fear. This was not something that I ever experienced, and I'm so grateful for that. So, those are the 12 signs of coercive control, and I sincerely hope that nobody watching this is experiencing any of them. But if you are, it might be worth your time maybe to do a little bit of thinking about what's going on in your relationship and your life. The reality is, it's very difficult to find help for this. I was very happy to learn that coercive control is now illegal in the United Kingdom. Not yet here in Canada. And I don't think it's illegal in the United States either at this point as I record this. But according to a government website here in Canada, Coercive control is now being recognized as a form of domestic abuse. And sadly, I can say personally that I don't think it's taken seriously as a form of abuse, because I did have to call for assistance from the police 3 times during the last 3 years of our marriage. And though they had compassion for my situation, they fully admitted that they could do nothing. I was told that if there was no physical violence, nothing could be done by the police. The only thing that I could do was to somehow come up with thousands of dollars and hire a family lawyer to have him removed. I wasn't able to find that money. So I was a victim of coercive control. And I did live through the cycles of abuse for 11 of those 12 years of our marriage. It's devastating to go through something like that. And I'm very grateful that I don't have to deal with that anymore. And again, in next week's video, I'll talk about the cycles of abuse and how it's never 24/7, which is one of the reasons why we stay in these relationships. As always, my friends, if you'd like to send me a message or ask me to discuss a topic, feel free to leave comments under the videos or go check out my channel description. I have my email address there, and you are so welcome to send me an email. I hope that by sharing this with you, my friends, you were able to take something thoughtful from it. Thank you so much for watching. Please be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.